Hello, CCS family. My name is Dion Blue, and I'm your new Chief of Equity. It is my pleasure to meet you in this virtual space, and I look forward to the day I can meet you in person. You'll hear from me today during your professional development, but please know that this is the first of many conversations we will have on ways we can work together to create more equitable outcomes for students of Columbus City Schools. Now, you may be asking yourself, is equity really important in all of our schools, or is it just certain schools and specific kids? Well, today I'm going to show you just a few of the places where equity is important. Are you ready? Come on, let's go. Equity is important on the east side. Equity is important here where success is the only option. Equity is important on the north side. La equidad es importante aquí. Equity is very important here at our bus compounds. Equity is important here, even for our youngest learners. Equity is also important on the west side. Equity is important in Region 3. Equity is important for a global society. Equity is important on the northeast side. You guessed it, equity is important here as well. As you can see, equity is important on every side of town, in every feeder pattern, and in every region of Columbus City Schools. It is important in the classroom, the cafeteria, on the playground, and even on the bus. Equity is important in our larger community, and of course, it's important right here. Equity is going to be a vital part of our future success as a district. That type of transformational change doesn't happen overnight, but with the help of every adult whose work impacts the lives of students, we can accomplish the mission of ensuring that every single student in Columbus City Schools is highly educated, prepared for leadership and service, and empowered for success as a citizen in a global community. Thank you, CCS family. I hope you're ready to rise up and get started. I sure am. Hello, and welcome to the module Equity 101, the impact of equity on student success. The purpose of this module is to start a collective conversation about equity, one of many that will help our district embark on a more intentional and sustained journey towards reaching equity both at the school level and at the district level. It is important to know that we will not and cannot address every equity issue in an introductory PD module. Instead, this is an opportunity to level set. In other words, it is a way to bring us all into one conversation with one common understanding of equity as a district. Our understanding of the equity work ahead of us will evolve as we have further conversations. We will work to get input from teachers, non-teaching staff, administrators, students, families, and community members. You will be asked throughout the module to stop, reflect, and have conversations in real time with your peers and team members. We do not expect anyone to be an expert or to speak for a particular group. Instead, each of you should consider yourselves co-learners with one another. To begin, I would like to provide an overview of the module. We'll start by setting the space. In other words, your group will adopt norms for the conversation, also called community agreements, so that everyone feels comfortable sharing their perspectives with peers and team members throughout the conversation. Secondly, we will frame the module around two essential questions, which will anchor our learning objectives. The primary work of this session will be to define what is and what is not meant by the term equity, what it looks like, and what may get in the way of achieving it based on your context. I'll mention the term context a lot throughout this module. By that, I just mean if you're a teacher, a counselor, a social worker, bus driver, food service employee, secretary, coach, etc. Whatever role you have in service to kids is your context for our purposes today. Lastly, you will have the opportunity to discuss with your teams what you can do both individually and collectively to reduce or remove barriers for the students that you serve. We have three objectives for the day. The first being to develop a shared understanding of culture, diversity, and equity. We will talk about ways that equity or a lack of equity can impact student success, both academically and socially.
Finally, we will discuss some of the barriers to equity and how we can begin to remove them and see our work and our students through an equity lens. Some of you may ask, what are community agreements? They are also called norms, but the purpose is to have a set of agreed upon ground rules for interaction and conversation that everyone agrees to follow. The goal is to create a respectful, safe, and inclusive space in which everyone feels more comfortable participating. Because the topics can be sensitive and may spark a wide variety of emotions, it is imperative that everyone in the space feels comfortable and validated in whatever they want to share. Please feel free to pause here, take a moment to cover the expectations, make sure everyone understands them, add others if the team feels it's necessary, and then get everyone's agreement. Feel free to refer back to these expectations as needed. For this session, let's frame the conversation around two essential questions. What is culture and diversity, and how do they help frame conversations about equity? And what is equity and why is it important? If, as a district, this is our mission, we must be able to produce this outcome for every single Columbus City School student every single day. That is the goal of our equity work, to achieve our mission for all students. Quickly, let's go through the definition of culture. As you can see, we can conceive of culture in a variety of ways, but the most important thing to understand is that regardless of race, we can all situate ourselves within these definitions. Even individuals of the same race may be culturally similar in some ways and culturally different in other ways. The more we become aware of the various components of culture and are able to unpack our own beliefs, attitudes, and values based on our cultural experiences, the better we as educators can become in understanding, working alongside, and advocating for students whose cultural or linguistic diversity may put them at a disadvantage in our schools. Race, class, gender, nationality, sexuality, ability, be that physical ability, mental ability, or cognitive ability, as well as all of the other aspects listed here, all make up our individual diversity and are indivisible components of our cultural identities. You can think of culture as a lens that everyone has and is specific to them. Our lens is the unique perspective we use to view the world around us. It is developed through our socialization and is impacted by our backgrounds and life experiences, including those experiences we have that are based on our various cultural identities. This is a critical piece to understanding equity because students who may be the same racially may be different culturally, which means that even if all of the students in your building look the same, their needs may vary. Pause here for a quick check-in as a team. Were there any aspects of culture mentioned in the last slide that you hadn't thought about before, as far as your own cultural background or that of students? Think about an aspect of culture in your own life that you hadn't considered before. How might thinking about your own culture differently help you think about the cultural needs of students differently? Consider this image of an elephant. These 7 blindfolded individuals each experience the elephant differently based on their proximity and location. Approaching equity can be very similar. Depending on your location, in other words, your background and experiences, you may have a very different interpretation of what equity is and how to reach equity goals. Think about that for just a moment. If you only see the elephant from your limited perspective, you are likely to miss the entire picture and therefore could miss important information to help you better approach the problem. Our approach to equity has to be collaborative and intentional in order to see the bigger picture and solve complex issues related to achieving our equity goals. Time for another Chew Chat check in. So, what words or phrases come to mind when you hear the word equity? Pause the module here to discuss briefly as a team. You could also answer the question, what would it look like to achieve equity for your school, team, or department? Be sure to have someone capture responses for future discussion. We will revisit this discussion as we think about what actions we need to take to achieve the shared vision of equity. Here is a definition of equity from the National Equity Project that we will use to get our district's equity work started. Take a moment to read and reflect on this definition. What does it mean to you? Think for a moment about a student you had last year, or maybe the year before. It may have been a student that you looked at and immediately saw potential, or it may have been a student that you looked at and perhaps saw red flags, or you had concerns about that student's ability to successfully reach high school graduation. If you have ever looked at a student of any age and thought or said, that student will or will not make it based on where they live, who their siblings or parents are, who they associate with, what their home language or citizenship status is, or what trauma they've experienced, then you understand the need for equity. We should never be able to look at a student and say, this kid will make it, but that one will not. The goal of equity is to remove that predictability. We should be able to look at any student of any age from any background and see a CCS graduate who is highly educated, prepared for leadership and service, and empowered for success as a student, as a citizen in a global community. In order to reach the desired equity outcomes, we have to also understand that not every student will receive equal resources and supports. Instead, they will receive the resources and supports they need to reach equal outcomes according to our district's mission. Consider this image as an example. If we give every student the exact same thing, we can see that there will be some who already have what they need and don't require the specific support provided to all, whereas other students may need more or may need a completely different support altogether. We must be able to see the elephant from all perspectives in order to best approach equity across the district in the variety of ways that may be needed, so that students get the supports they need, not just a blanket of support given to every student. While you can think of the previous image more specifically from the school level, the goal of the equity work at the district level is to remove the barriers themselves in order to one day alleviate the need for extra supports in order for all students to reach success. At this point, you may still be wondering, what are some of the equity barriers? Maybe you're not certain what sorts of issues may contribute to of may contribute to inequitable outcomes for students across the district. At this point, you may be still wondering, what are some of the equity barriers? Maybe you're not certain what sorts of issues may contribute to inequitable outcomes for students across the district. While there are others, here are a few examples that you will have the opportunity to discuss further in the next slide. The first is deficit model thinking. How do we think about and talk about our students and families across the board? Do we say students could be more successful if only they were more responsible, made better decisions, valued education more? Those comments and others may indicate that we see students themselves as the problem. Next, think about the ways in which we sometimes approach teaching students about themselves and about people who are different from them. Are we giving them the opportunity to think critically, to discuss real problems they see in their lives and communities? Are we considering the impact that negative schooling experiences have had on students or their families? Approaching diversity and equity can't be about feel good celebrations at specific times of the year. We have to look at diversity and equity holistically and realistically. Finally, consider how we approach supports, services, processes, and other programs for students who struggle, either academically or socially and behaviorally. While we absolutely need those supports, we have to work simultaneously to break down the systemic barriers that produce the need for those supports. Time to check in again. Please pause here to process some of what we've discussed so far. With your teams, take a few minutes to have the following discussion. What are some of the barriers that students and families experience in your classroom, school, region, etc.? Think about only what you can control. This shouldn't be a conversation about the complex problems in our larger society or the district as a whole. Think instead of what you can impact. Along that same line, if time allows, or if you've already had discussions as a team about the first question, talk instead about any specific practices or processes that your team can stop doing, start doing, or improve upon in order to remove some of the barriers students may encounter in your classroom or building. Remember, this conversation should be localized to your specific context, not a conversation of what others should be doing. Pause here and come back after your discussion. Remember to have someone take a few notes.
I would like to become a pediatric physical therapist so I can help kids.
I want to apply to UCLA and major in psychology.
I want to be an entrepreneur and start my own clothing brand.
I'm hoping to go to four-year college and major in architecture.
I want to be an animator.
I want to practice law. I want to help either in civil law or immigration law because those are the things that I see that are needed in my community to move forward.
It is completely true that all students have the ability to succeed. And the only reason students are not succeeding is because they are not close enough to the opportunities that will allow them to succeed.
Education was not built for everyone. And that's the problem. Until we really start looking at that reasons behind it and look at all the isms that play into the classroom, we truly can't do what we need to do for our children.
Oftentimes, the adults and the system around us are blaming the kids for their failures. What our work is about is looking at the system around the student that is producing these outcomes.
Students that go through different things such as homelessness, foster care, even people who migrate to this country or move states need more support to just go through the education system because they have to deal with coping with what happened to them or what is happening to them.
Newcomers and English language learners, I feel like they don't get enough support.
What I think of what stood in the way of my success is the student-to-teacher ratio. I wouldn't say I didn't learn anything, but if I needed one-on-one help, I didn't always get it.
As you can see, I'm a Black woman, and obviously, like, the system was not constructed for like people of color to succeed. So every day I felt like I had to struggle extra hard to succeed in my classes.
We really have an opportunity to do better and to see students from a really asset-based lens. And it's really on us as adults and on the system to change the policies and practices and procedures that we are implementing that further perpetuate structural racism and the gaps that we see.
Some students come to us needing more. There are deficits of learning by the time they get to us because of that structural racism. They don't have the supports. Their needs aren't being met by their communities. And so we have to overcome all of that and catch them up and advance them.
Educational equity ultimately is when every child has the opportunity to succeed in education, regardless of race, regardless of zip code, regardless of color, regardless of ethnicity, where every child has an opportunity to succeed.
So how can we do everything that we can to meet the child where they are? That's what equity is.
And so we have to be willing in our system to give more to those who need more when they need it.
Students, parents, and families are in classrooms every day. So who better to determine what solutions are than the folks who are closest to what's actually happening every day?
We should always listen to students. And we should always ask students what is happening for them and what are their ideas and what are their needs.
It can start by focusing on a small group of students who are experiencing success. And we can do this by listening to their stories, understanding the communities they're from, asking their feedback. And if we do this and we identify their needs, it'll actually build the capacity of the system to impact the whole.
We need more resources in school specifically that serves Black and brown students, because these students have to work extra hard and do like double the work just to succeed.
For me, having a trusted adult at the school is very helpful because then you always have someone to talk to here.
I think it would be helpful if the teachers got to know me more and like interact with the students.
If you look at the kids that have stuff going on at home and stuff and you put in the work to help them, then it can really change their lives.
I stress myself out, so I feel like there should be therapists at each school because it can really help kids.
Especially first generation college students need more support on what to expect in their future college experience and how to navigate through all that.
It's the ways our systems are set up, like it's very segregated by like neighborhood and race, class, ability. And if we make policies to like integrate schools, not just like physically, but economically, then it will just better the education system for everyone.
What we're seeing more and more today is that belonging and equity are connected. You cannot produce a curriculum, a policy, a treatment of people in a disparaging way if you feel like they belong. You just can't do it. We have to move people to see that other children making it means their child is making it. And if somebody's child is not making it, it means their child is not making it. That's a hard turn for people to make, but that's what's required for people to see that equity is in all of their interests.
We need to actually put our money where our mouth is and resource and invest in education so that we can achieve the outcomes that equity envisions.
I know we will be successful. It's not going to come tomorrow, unfortunately, and it will be a battle, but we will eventually get what's needed in order to truly educate all of our children, regardless of where they live.
Pause here to share some brief reflections on the video. Did you have any takeaways? Did the video help you think any differently about the students you serve? What do students in your classrooms and schools want from their adults related to equity? How do you know? Offer one idea of something you can do differently this school year in order to get closer to the notions of equity presented today. There are several reasons we should care about achieving equity across all levels of our district. First of all, we understand that schools face complex challenges, especially now during this double pandemic of COVID-19 and racial injustice experienced by both adults and students across our communities. Additionally, even during the most normal of times, our students' experiences don't always mirror the experiences of the adults who educate them, creating empathy gaps, communication gaps, and trust gaps between adults and students in our schools. Secondly, data is another area where we can see that disparities exist for students who are culturally or linguistically diverse. Trends show predictable racialized patterns in academic and behavior outcomes. In other words, Black and Brown students are more likely to experience higher rates of negative discipline outcomes and for subjective behavior infractions. This often leads to disproportionate numbers of suspensions, expulsions, and arrests. Additionally, data shows that these same student populations are also overrepresented in remedial courses and special education while being underrepresented in gifted programs, honors, AP, IB, and other rigorous courses. Particularly this uncertain and traumatic time, students need to feel a sense of emotional safety and belonging, especially those who we may assume don't want to belong. Schools, whether virtual or brick and mortar, must be places where all students feel included, valued, and successful. They have to feel our support in order for us to gain their trust and cooperation. This means we have to be able to let go of any past negative feelings or experiences we may have had with particular students in order to give them a fresh start each day. Engaging with families may also reveal equity issues. We have to be able to see families as partners, especially now that they're spending so much more time assisting with their child's education at home. The patience and understanding we have for students has to also extend to their families. We need their trust and cooperation as well, and we must be mindful of the barriers that impact the way we perceive their engagement and try to remove those barriers as much as is in our power to do so. Sometimes it just takes a change of perspective to see school interactions from that family's point of view. Let's consider again the mission and vision of Columbus City Schools. In order to accomplish this mission and vision, we will need to unpack complex issues, make tough decisions, and have difficult conversations at all levels of the district, from the boots on the ground employees in our schools, to those outside of school buildings who help schools run every day, to those transporting and feeding students, to those deciding how and where resources are allocated. We all have a role to play in making CCS a more equitable place for students. It begins with you, and it begins with me. For our final chew and chat, share with your peers what makes you most excited when thinking about the work of achieving equity across our schools and district. At the same time, what makes you most concerned? Remember that there are sometimes things that happen in students' lives that we can't control and perhaps cannot impact. So focus on what we can control and can impact. Extend this conversation into future team meetings and continue to capture teams can better visualize the ways that you can impact equity within your context. Finally, is there something that you heard today or that was discussed with your team that you can apply in some way? Even one small step is beneficial because a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Feel free to pause the module here to review the salient points of the day. I hope that we have achieved our learning objectives and that you have a better understanding of our definition of equity, why it is important to our work, and how it impacts student success. Additionally, I hope that you were able to take away one new idea, thought, or concept to help you look at your work with a different lens. If this is a lens you already have and use on a regular basis when interacting with students and families, how can you help support your colleagues who may need assistance to help develop their own lens? At the end of the day, this James Baldwin quote best sums up the work we have ahead of us. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Thank you, CCS family. Equity is important here. So let's all rise up because we're just getting started.